Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Nadia Abunasser, Federal and Development Projects Director with the Entrepreneurship and Innovation team at the MEDC. My role at the MEDC is that I support programs throughout the state to assist high-tech startups commercialize their technologies, raise funding, and find their first customers. Basically working through our ecosystem service providers and partners across the state. Today I have the pleasure of hosting the second in this series of conversations where we're highlighting our statewide SmartZone partners. The SmartZones are partially funded through the MEDC Entrepreneurship and Innovation Initiative, and we have 21 of them across the state, 19 of which are active. They provide a distinct geographic location for these tech-based companies to get, and entrepreneurs and researchers to get support locally, get access to community assets that will help them grow and make their companies successful. The SmartZone partners will collaborate with their local universities and generally include technology business accelerators and incubators to provide the various resources and services to Michigan entrepreneurs. To kick off today's conversation, I have two of our colleagues from the Grand Rapids SmartZone ecosystem, Kevin McCurren, Commercialization Program Director and Gateway Representative with MSU, and Paul Moore, Director at StartGarden. Welcome, Kevin and Paul.
Thank you.
Let's start off by learning a little bit about your organizations and your respective roles. And Paul, why don't we have you start the conversation?
Sure, no problem. I gotta just acknowledge the funniness of these kinds of events. So this is the first time I've done a public talk in front of what looks like 29 people now, where my daughter was able to come and tell me that she can't get to her driver's ed appointment. And so I'm trying to text my wife to say, hey, we need some help over here. But hi, everyone. And also, by the way, since we can't necessarily see you, if you want to just throw out what it is you would love to get out of this panel up in the Q&A as soon as you want to, or in the chat, please, because I know Kevin and Nadia and I would love to address whatever it is that you're hoping to get out of this. But I'm Paul Moore. I'm a director at StartGarden. But I give you, Nadia, is it cool if I just do the quick history of StartGarden? Done it quite a few times. So StartGarden is located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It began in 2012. When we began as a venture capital fund that was trying to get startups going and staying in Grand Rapids. So we were funding ideas that were submitted to a website every single week at $5,000. And the sort of the stair-step system that we had was that we could fund up to $500,000 into a startup. We knew that from the beginning what we were doing was we were doing both what we would now call ecosystem building, which is much more in the realm of like economic development, as far as are you setting the conditions in your city for there to be lots of opportunities for lots of different types of entrepreneurs. And we were doing this very narrow thing, known as venture capital. And then eventually those two roads would diverge. So we funded, during those first few years, we funded 180 of those ideas, and literally everything under the sun that you can imagine. I won't get into examples, but if it makes you laugh, we probably funded it. And we also funded some pretty incredible companies that are still growing today. But what we found was right around 2015 that venture capital was an extremely narrow financial tool for trying to really help entrepreneurship as a whole. In fact, I think the statistic is that only 0.06 companies will ever even use venture capital as a financing tool to get them off the ground. So we really started to expand what our vision of an ecosystem was, and start to think of it as it's an orchestra where every organization and every incubator or every financial instrument, whether it be a few $1,000 grant at a pitch competition or an angel investment group, all of them need to work together and in concert. So we really expanded that vision of the ecosystem and really started to look at Star Garden as how can we bring some direction and some focus into that ecosystem. So that's when we started to work with the city of Grand Rapids through the SmartZone. It's when we started to really bring a lot of the philanthropic foundations on board. And it's really when we adopted racial equity as a primary, if not, but the circle around all of the work in which we do. And so we also brought on Daryl Ross and Jorge Gonzalez, who were leaders in the African American and Hispanic community in economic development, and we changed our leadership into a flat co-leadership model, so that we couldn't, as an organization, we can't make big decisions unless we're all on board. And that seemed to us just an absolutely necessary way to ensure that racial equity was embedded into the day-to-day decisions and the big annual decisions of the organization. So that was in the 2016 to 2017 timeframe. Our funding streams now come from multiple different sources. A lot of what we do is we try to get resources into the hands of entrepreneurs. We try to avoid duplicating anything, right? So if somebody's teaching a class, we're not going to teach that class. If somebody's offering a great mentorship program, we're not going to create a duplicate mentorship program. Almost always, inevitably, where it seems like the biggest gap is actually, cash into the hands of entrepreneurs, which is, I would use the metaphor, it's gas into the tank of entrepreneurs, where, you can build the car and you can paint it and you can work every weekend and every night in the garage on it, but if you can't put gas in it, it's not ever going out of the garage. So a lot of what we do is kind of like, we'll use something like the SmartZone, which is public. It comes through the MEDC, the state's Michigan Economic Development Corporation. We use that to finance what can the SmartZone finance, within its regulations, and what would it be really effective at supporting. With the foundations, we work with them. What can they finance that would be really effective for them to finance? And can they finance something that's explicitly, we're going to accelerate Black and Brown owned businesses that are less than 3 years old? Great, let's use the money for that. And then we do fundraising to the tune of about $500,000 a year that we're able to go out and get from private sources to just turn directly into grants into entrepreneurs. And I would also reiterate, those are, these are no strings attached, small $5,000 and $20,000 grants that we really use to try to get people an on-ramp into entrepreneurship, because I think we all know what the success looks like when it comes to starting a business. It's just a question, I think, for every city, including Grand Rapids, is how many on-ramps do you have onto the highway toward success? So we spent a lot of time just trying to develop more and more and more ways to get involved, including working this year. We're trying to do something with one of our annual competitions, the 100, where we select 100 aspiring entrepreneurs to get $1,000, and then they work for a couple months, and then 10 of them, go on to win $20,000 during our demo day. Which Detroit has a demo day, which is I've been to several times, and it's fantastic. I'm gonna have to cut it short for just a moment. Let's turn it over to Kevin, and I'll pick up on where some of the cool things we were doing.
All right, Kevin, we'll hand it over to you then, since Paul has to deal with something. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how MSU fits into things in Grand Rapids and how you fit into it.
All right. So MSU signed an agreement with the local district financing authority, or the city of Grand Rapids, recently to run the Gateway Grant, which is the Gateway Grant is designed to help people access the vast MEDC resources and all the programs that are available to them. So I'm part of the MSU Innovation Center, which includes the MSU Tech Transfer Office, the Business Connect Office, the Entrepreneur Center as part of the, for the students, that's part of the program over there. And it also includes a lot of the research and technology that comes out of MSU. And so I'm officed at the new Grand Rapids Research Center, and our job is to help connect people with the various resources that are part of the MEDC. So my other job as part of the work that we do is to try to connect other entrepreneurs and other companies with the resources that are part of MSU, including the $700 million of research that comes out of MSU, the 1,400 researchers that are part of the MSU system, and the over 3,000 faculty and administrative staff as part of the system over there. So,
okay. Thanks for that. With that as a backdrop, can you guys tell me about some of the companies that you work with, talking about what the company is, what they do, and how you were able to help them meet the needs that they had in the Grand Rapids area? Paul, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So there's been quite a few over the years. I mean, I think being able to morph around what we do, it's been everything from financing companies to sitting on boards to doing more. I mean, doing things like advocating, with the MEDC about what are some things that we can, or some creative ways that we can take some of these public funds to really support companies. So I think that I'll use a few more recent examples, and I think that I'm going to use these examples specifically because I think that this is what it looks like a lot of the time, especially at the very earliest stages, is that when you're not necessarily supporting a company in the earliest stage, you're supporting an entrepreneur, and recognizing that entrepreneur might go through the idea for their company may go through 5 iterations, and then the 5th one starts to look very different from the first one, or that entrepreneur may completely pursue 3 or 4 different opportunities as they're developing and starting to set their sights on something that's maybe a bit more ambitious than the previous thing. So I think a lot of, like, one of our favorite entrepreneurs right now is someone that we found. She and her husband are both data scientists that were coming out of GVSU. Both of them from Atlanta. Both of them are African American, and definitely had the question of, is Grand Rapids the kind of place that we would actually put some roots down in, or do we want to go back home? Where it's more familiar. We were able to support her through not only the various competitions, we sort of make sure that we have a monthly and annual sort of circuit of competitions so that people are always able to continually, like, jump back in, work on the new idea, win some money, get out, keep moving. We were able to support her through those competitions, and then also working directly with connecting her to different people that we knew that she didn't know, largely because she was new to the area, being able to provide a space and enough sort of programming around that space where we're seeing her developing collaborations with people that we would have never thought to pair her with, which is another sort of way that I would define the success of an ecosystem, is when you start to see a community forming around an entrepreneur that wasn't the direct, Paul connected Ariana to this person, but she's currently working on. She's got a couple of hustles going. One of them is she's got a top 10 women in tech podcast. I think it's called Black Women in Tech, with Ariana Waller. And she's working on the back end system for the cannabis dispensary system. So kind of taking the, looking at what's a new industry that's coming online and what would be the unique sort of logistics and back end sort of level of software, point of sale kind of style software that would need some specific customizing for that industry. And so she's building a product around that. And that's, again, probably that's not that's not the startup she was working on when we first met, but she's got an enormous talent. And so a lot of the work that we do is trying to recognize that talent early on and then just, throw everything in the kitchen sink at what at the entrepreneur.
Oh, that's great. Kevin, do you have any examples? I know you guys are still relatively new.
Yeah, well, we've got quite a bit of examples. Our primary tool that we use is the Business Accelerator Fund Grant, which, if people haven't heard, they ran out of money.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
I know. So, and I hope that we do, because that's a really, really important program for early stage companies that helps them get them to a new milestone. And beyond that milestone, there's something significant that can happen. So when Star Garden came in, the idea was to try to create a regional Business Accelerator Fund grant as part of the whole program. And I think overall that was a good idea, but it didn't necessarily pan out. So what happened is that the city felt that they needed their own administrator of the Business Accelerator Fund grant. And so that's why they put out the RFP, and that's why MSU responded to the RFP and got the RFP. And since we came in and effectively in October or November, we've been able to do at least 8 different successful Business Accelerator Fund grants. And have been able to help a number of the companies. One of the first companies that we helped was Ag Help, which is a company out of Milton that's trying to connect migrant workers with producers and farms, which in the past was an old antiquated system of using cell phones and going back to the old places that they used to work at. Feliciano Paredes did a very good job of putting together, he knows the system very well. And so he's done a good job of putting together an online platform that connects migrant workers with producers, farmers, and all the other kind of people that are using migrant workers. So that's a good example. And what we've been able to do with him was help him. We engaged a marketing firm to help him do some A and B testing to figure out how to do that, and also to help him create a platform for his trade shows. He does a lot of work with trade shows. Another good example of a really small grant that we've been able to do, which also ties into the MSU connections, was there was a guy, Mick Hanna out there, who has a little device called Easy Crutch. And Mick has been working on this for like 4 or 5 years. He was trying to sell it directly, but really what he needed was a connection with a provider system. So we've got him connected through the MSU resources in the medical school. We were able to get him connected into Mary Free Bed. And they were able to look at his device and said they wanted to do a product trial. So we sort of paid for the IRB that he needed to do a product trial, and that and it got stopped because of the COVID process, but I think it's going to get started up again this year. So that's a company that has been out there. It just needed a little boost on trying to figure out the pathway to the market and to see if his product can get adopted in a clinical setting. Another one, which is, we just got it approved, which is the Patient Company, which is a lateral transfer device to move a patient from a bed to a gurney. It's the #1 cause of back injuries, and it's an old system. It's called a half-sheet system that has been used ever since Florence Nightingale participated in. But the patients weren't 300 pounds, and so they're trying to get a few nurses that are moving and patient transfer people that are moving people over from bed to a gurney. And so it's a #1 cause of back injuries in the hospital system. And so we were able to get him a $50,000 engagement so that he can go through the FDA approval process. And on the other side of that FDA approval process is an investment in an order for over $1 million. So I think those are really good examples. We have multiple examples of other kinds of people we're working with right now. And so we have a whole backlog of companies, high-tech, high-growth companies that are in Grand Rapids area. We also work with a number of companies that are in northern Michigan. So I know that there's a couple of companies out of Traverse City that we're working with. And so I saw the question that came up out of there, is that why isn't there not a SmartZone? But we do work with some of them, some of the companies. Now, we have to be very careful about working with companies. So because the city's engaging us to work with Grand Rapids companies. And so I have to make sure that we always can serve our Grand Rapids companies. So.
Okay, thanks. So something startups are usually looking for is space. Does either Start Garden or MSU have facilities or access to facilities that startups could use, assuming things get to the point where people are in office buildings again?
Yeah, we've got a pretty fantastic 16,000 square foot space that has been largely empty for the past 3 months. But prior to that, we had probably about 200 companies that are using it in some capacity. Now I say some capacity, going back to, being very fluid, especially in the earliest stages of getting something started, where our space is used anywhere from just being like a landing spot for a nights and weekends project, or a team that's working nights and weekends on a project to be able to grab a conference room and get together, to teams of about up to 8 people where there's team workspaces for them to use. But yeah, the goal of that space is to, as much as possible, build in the strength of a community of people that are all really sticking their necks out and have a huge learning curve and need to meet a lot of people. Give them the proximity to each other that they can bump into each other and learn from each other, and also, through the different events, bringing in people. A stretch goal for us, I think, which we're actually talking a lot about with our SmartZone, is how can we bring some of these companies that outgrew our space, that are now, anywhere between 25 to 150 employees, bring them back into the proximity of this, early incubating generation, so that we can really start to see the connection between the fast growing and the older, more mentorship kind of entrepreneurs and the startups they're leading and the younger generation.
Cool. Kevin, what about the MSU building downtown?
Yeah, for the most part, the MSU building, the Grand Rapids Research Center, is occupied, but there is some space on the 5th floor that people can use to rent it out. I know, and there's wet space up there too. So, we have the ability to manage the life science resources. The new building that is being built, which is the Doug Meyer MSU building, is actually going to have more space available for the public, and it's in a connection with being developed in connection with Rockford Construction, and actually they're the ones that are managing the space over there. So, but at the same time, I think on the 5th floor of the Cook DeVos building, there's some life science building up there. The LDF, the LDFA is, we're in discussions with the LDFA about potentially helping companies, if there are life science companies, finds some wet lab space and hopefully be able to subsidize it. So in the past, when GVSU ran it, there was the LDFA was willing to help subsidize some of the companies that needed space, wet lab space up there. Tetra Discovery Partners was part of one of the companies that came through. So was Packaging Compliance Labs, and so was NextGen MDX. All started off in the 5th floor of the Cook DeVos. So the other thing to note about the program, the BAF program, is we work closely with some of the providers in the system. So the Applied Medical Device Institute, we work closely with them on helping some of their early stage companies get funding so that they can engage some of the services of A&DI. So.
Okay. All right. So we've touched on this a little bit, but how important do you see the role of the SmartZone in general in the community, and how do you guys engage with the community to try and make sure nobody gets missed? Paul, you want to go first? Paul, you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, there's also a question hanging out about PPE opportunities. Normally, I just to address it really quick, because it might actually be a nice segue into what you're discussing. If we are talking about personal protective equipment opportunities and different startups that have pivoted that way, that's been something that's definitely been going on, I think, in the ecosystem since COVID started. We've got a startup that is now sourcing protective masks, both the surgical masks and the N95 masks from China, for essential workers and people who need them. It's called covidguardfund.com, and then they give away a third of those PPE equipment pieces to the medical workers that need them. And also a woman who's doing 3D knitting for various products. One of them was a swaddle, so I think it's called swaddolini.com, is now 3D knitting masks, and I've got a couple of them, and they work out really great. I highly recommend them. But if that's what somebody's trying to find, then I can recommend that. But both of those companies are subsidized by the SmartZone when it comes to things like the rent, for instance, for being able to work in our incubator. They're able to subsidize, obviously, the various people, like the staff that's working with them through us. They're able to sponsor and underwrite things like events that could be useful, like either events where they're getting up on stage and sharing what they're doing with their company, or we're bringing people together that they should meet. So a lot of what we've found, it seems like the Smart Zone's really most effective at doing is trying to, one, take some of the ancillary expenses off of the entrepreneur himself or herself, and two, really try to invest where it would be a stretch for like a private investor, right? An angel group isn't necessarily going to want to fund a business incubator or, you know, develop a makerspace or some of these pieces that are really vital to the infrastructure of a city, but fall outside of the wheelhouse of investing. So we often go to the Smart Zone to help or to try to convince them to help pay for things that otherwise won't exist if it's purely funded through the private sector. And so, yeah, I think there's been quite a few examples of those things, but a lot of the work that they do, just, you know, candidly, is if they can underwrite programming or operational expenses or rent or, you know, facility expenses in order to free up cash to go into the entrepreneur pockets, that seems to be where those dollars are most useful. And because Smart Zones cannot invest directly into a company, which is oftentimes one of the more confusing things, because it's a, you know, some cities have a pretty robust tax increment financing capture through their Smart Zone. And startups often don't understand that it's those funds have to be used more creatively to figure out ways to support an ecosystem versus to support an individual company. So a lot of what we do is figuring out how the ecosystem can more effectively be supported year after year through the Smart Zone, and recognizing that it's a moving target. You know, a lot of the legislation was written in the late 90s, early 2000s, and cultivating a high-tech startup ecosystem in 2020 is different than it was back when everybody was on a 56K modem in their house. Yeah.
It's different than it was 6 months ago. Yeah. Kevin, you have anything to add?
Yeah, you know, I would say think about what the situation would be if the Smart Zones weren't there. I mean, where would you go to find your way around the ecosystem in early stage funding? You'd have to go, you know, I started companies 20 years ago before the ecosystem ever existed, and I had to go knock on individual doors to try to find investors and to find the resources that were needed. Since we've started developing ecosystems, there's always a central place for entrepreneurs to go to try to find the resources that are available with various types of company for various types of resources. And every company has their own need for different kinds of resources. Lifestyle businesses have a different need. High-tech companies have a different need. Neighborhood businesses have a different need. They have all different kinds of funding sources. So in the Smart Zones allow you to go to one place or two or three different places and try to figure out what your pathway is. So that's why I think it's important.
All right. So before we move to questions, kind of wrapping up here, can each of you basically tell us what one key takeaway you'd like the attendees to remember about your organization and the work you do? Paul?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that I would just say we are very serious about trying to give opportunity, a genuine opportunity. Usually that opportunity is going to come with some cash. Tonight we'll actually be doing our monthly pitch competition 5x5 night, which is 5 people competing for a $5,000 grant that's no strings attached. Annually, we do our 100, which I mentioned earlier, is 100 people getting $1,000 to compete, to be 10 to get $20,000. Those programs today have probably, I would say, what we typically see is we see about 50-50 male-female participation, 50-50 minority-owned business to white business participation. We've taken trying to close the disparity gap in entrepreneurship very seriously and have seen some great results. And candidly, you know, since I know we're in the Detroit Startup Week, if you have overlooked Grand Rapids, especially if you are a minority entrepreneur or somebody working in the tech world or the marketing world, please do not overlook us. I know we've got a reputation. We're trying to overcome it, and we're making progress. So come over, take a look, get to know our startup community, and look for us when we're in Detroit, because we like to come and visit you guys when we're able to travel again.
Kevin?
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people realize that the Gateway Grant and the program that we run is not just about the BAF program. It's about all the programs that the MEDC supports, including one of the best programs in the country that supports SBIR and STTR programs, Small Business Innovation Research Grants that are part of the federal government grants. And so we've had several companies that we've introduced to that are eligible for SBIR grants, and we've introduced them to BBC and the Bio-Business Consultant Group that is, I worked in several states and I knew them before I even moved to Michigan. And they were they have such a great reputation. So it's not just about the BAF, it's also about the First Capital Fund, the Pre-Seed Fund, which we're going to do. And then in addition to that, we're also going to be bringing the Conquer Accelerator into Grand Rapids as part of the program that the LDFA is supporting us with, to bring the Conquer Accelerator over there. And we're going to have 5 companies starting off in September on a 10-week program in November, going through to November with a final pitch competition, final pitch day. And then in addition to that, they get $20,000 investment from the Red Cedar Ventures Fund. So in addition to that, we're also the recipient of an RFP we're going to be running a pre-seed fund in the near future. And it's just getting ready to roll out. So it's all about the other programs that are part of the MEDC supports too. So.
Okay. Well, thank you both for sharing all this great information about your work and your organizations. And I believe that if anyone wants to reach out to Paul or Kevin, their contact should be in the speaker details. My contact information is there as well. And if you'd like to learn more about the MEDC entrepreneurial initiatives, you can go to the MEDC's website, michiganbusiness.org/entrepreneurship, and it does give a list. There's a map of the smart zones and a list of all of the programs that we fund. And at this point, I think I want to open it up to questions. I think we've kind of answered them throughout. And it looks like Paul just shared his contact info in the chat. There was one question about why there wasn't a smart zone in the upper, what was it, lower northern part of the state. And just for clarity, that was an open competition maybe around 20 years ago, and they had to come up with, I mean, there was legislation. The legislation closed and there was never an application from that area. So that's just how it worked. But all of our smart zones, all of our funded programs can work with companies in those areas. It's not like it's off limits to companies. Companies from all over the state work with with our smart zones, and we do work closely with the incubator up in Traverse City, 20 Fathoms. So there is some work there. It's just how it worked out.
And we've had two BAFs coming through the Traverse City area. So we're trying to work with Lauren Bigelow and the 20 Fathoms group on how to actually provide some kind of ongoing support up there for as a part of a gateway grant. So the other thing I wanted to make sure that people understood, one of the reasons why the BAF program is running out of money is because they opened it up to COVID type of applications. So there were three criteria that they opened it up to. One of them was high-tech companies that were impacted by the COVID. They could get rent and utility support. Then there was also high-tech companies that had a COVID-related type of application, and it was an accelerated process, and it opened up the door to a lot of people, and so a lot of grants came in at $50,000 for those kind of companies, and then it also opened up the opportunity for companies that were providing PPE to apply, and so we've worked with a couple of different companies like that. So,
yeah. Well, and just on if we want to, because I'm always talking to people who are trying to wrap their minds around the smart zone, and I've started to joke that there's two kinds of people when it comes to the smart zone. There's the people that don't fully understand the smart zone, and then there's people that don't know about the smart zone. And I think that a lot of that has to do with just the nature of the pace at which technology and innovation changes, and the way that the legislation is sort of written to be fairly open-ended. And so they're continually, I think, adapting to the situation on the ground today. And so it's something that if people are interested in and they're trying to really understand, like, what are the opportunities, I would say it's probably something that's worth digging into, whomever is representing, a smart zone closest to you. To really understand what is it that particular one has done to adapt to the needs on the ground in that area, and then also keep in mind that's a pretty moving target, and they tend to look pretty different, every several years.
Yeah. Well, I guess with no more questions coming in, we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Kevin and Paul, for taking the time out to give us this great information. And I hope you guys have a good afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for sticking around and watching. And like I said in the chat, I'm Paul at starkgarden.com, and we'd love to host you in Grand Rapids, or reach out if you have any questions.